Hi, Andy. I'm University Professor at Governor State University. Andy Wolvin is the professor at University of Maryland. And we're going to be talking today about listening and its role for students and in society.
I'm sort of all over the map in terms of where I am with the study of listening. It's an interesting field of study, and I'm always encouraged that it's something that is certainly becoming very prominent today with your Chicago guy who's now in the White House, who is very much situating what he's doing and what we're doing across the world from a listening point of view, to try to bring in all different points of view and to analyze and assess much more carefully, much more readily from the various perspectives that he's drawing in his administration. And I'm encouraged by that because I think listening leadership is a very key feature for what we need to think about as we move into the 21st century.
In other words, what you're saying is we need leaders that model good listening. And I know your work, you've done a series of pieces. I just read your piece on the Secretary of Agriculture, was it? You're doing studies of politicians, people in the public sphere who are good listeners. Another one was Hillary Clinton and her listening to her in upstate New York when she was getting ready to run for the Senate.
Indeed, and I'm interested to follow now what she's doing in her present position as Secretary of State. And she did indicate and she did demonstrate in some of her recent foray into Asia that she is ready to listen and wanting to take much more of a listening posture in the world. And indeed, I think the public diplomacy effort in the Department of State is very illustrative of this in the sense that as we go into other cultures and better understand what those cultures are, by listening to them, we're going to be in a much better position to make diplomatic and national security decisions. We are fortunate here at the University of Maryland that James McGregor Burns, who is the leading figure in leadership, he produces a book almost every other year, he's just amazing. His theory of transformational leadership is the one that is very current in the sense that the leader is the person who finds the vision, then articulates that vision, and then leads the followers in the organization or the constituencies to realizing what that vision is. And I would argue that before getting to the articulation of that vision, you've got to be a good listener, that the leader needs to know what the issues are with the constituencies, what are the impediments, what are the goals, what is the history, the context, and so forth, before coming up with and defining the perfected vision, if you will, that will be the effort to transform what the organization may be.
I'm very situationally aware, and it's not just that my eyes are roaming around the environment, but they're also I pick up the clues, of a person's facial expressions and so forth.
So often people also make the assumption that listening is pretty synonymous with hearing, and that we're working only through the auditory channel. And yet how much the visual piece of this is very integral to effective listening. In fact, when you think about how the brain is wired to primarily handle visual discriminations, you can appreciate how much that scanning and how much that visual field is indeed a part of what we all do as listeners. And then to maintain eye contact, again, is cultural in that there are some cultures where people really are not very comfortable with that. And so you sort of have to adjust and adapt to where your listener, where your fellow communicator is in terms of using that sort of listening display. I'm always struck that it's a surprise to some people to think about visual listening. They think of it strictly from the auditory perspective, and yet how much we're influenced environmentally as well as body language and facial expression and eye behavior and all of those dimensions. You can appreciate in a town like Washington, so many agencies depend upon a lot of training in effective reading of facial expression and so forth in terms of national security, military, intelligence, where they're very dependent on recognizing deception cues on the part of those people who potentially could do us harm.
Well, anything you'd say to summarize, kind of to pull it all together?
It goes back to motivation, that you've got to choose to listen. The effective listener who really gets it is, first of all, a real goal setter. Somebody who clearly understands what am I about as a listener in this particular situation.
I really have to, and I do in fact, adjust to the situation. I have to keep that evaluative factor out of there, that critical factor, because many times I find myself shifting almost immediately in a discussion when I realize that what I thought was going to happen is not happening, and what I thought I was going to hear is not what I'm actually hearing.
And that's such a good example. Sometimes one of the pieces of advice we always used to impart was anticipate where the speaker is going next, and how that can just derail the communication, right? And in that you think you're going over in this direction and the speaker has gone in a completely different direction. As our conversation has demonstrated, we're talking about a very complex part of human behavior that cannot be reduced to something simple, something passive. And so I just, go about life trying to encourage people to take it more seriously and to be willing to and take the time to engage with others more fully.